Thank you also for being here. Thank you for being open-minded and interested in exploring this idea of living without exploiting and causing harm to other animals. Now, I went vegan back in 1985, but I didn't grow up as a vegan. Most of us don't grow up as vegans. Most of us grow up doing what everybody around us is doing, and most people eat meat and dairy and eggs. So I grew up in Hollywood, California. My parents still live there in the Hollywood Hills, and they were eating animal products, and I grew up eating animal products. In fact, as a kid, I even did commercials. My mother got me and my brothers and sisters into the Screen Children's Guild, and so they always need new kids, so because the kids get older, they need new kids. So we got into that, and I actually did commercials for McDonald's when I was really young, without really thinking about it. And most of us grow up eating meat and doing things everybody around us is doing without really thinking about it. So as time went, and as I learned about the factory farming industry, and then I learned that it was possible to live well without eating other animals, I went vegan, and that was 1985. In 1986, I felt that there was not a lot of attention being paid to what was happening to animals in the factory farming business. So I co-founded Farm Sanctuary, and we started actually going into these places to see firsthand what was happening. So we started basically as an investigative organization, but when we would go in, we would find living animals literally thrown in trash cans, or living animals thrown on piles of dead animals. So we started rescuing them and caring for them. And at the time, we were living in a little row house in Wilmington, Delaware. It wasn't really a big farm or anything close to it. We had a little backyard, and the kids in the neighborhood would come by and were very curious about the pigs or the turkeys or the calves that we were rescuing, and they started asking questions. And it became clear that these animals were great ambassadors. We could then tell their stories, the kids would connect to the animals, and then we would oftentimes offer them a veggie hot dog, let them try that, and let them know that there were alternatives they could eat instead of animal products. And the way that we funded the organization back in the mid-1980s was by selling vegan hot dogs out of our Volkswagen van at Grateful Dead concerts. And so that's how we started. Very much a grassroots organization, and I'm still very much grassroots at my core, and I'm very grateful for all the amazing things people are doing across Canada, across the US, across the world to speak out against this horrendous animal agriculture system, and encouraging people to recognize that our food choices matter. They matter. They're perhaps one of the most profound decisions we make every day, but most people don't really think about the impacts of their food choices and are eating food that is causing enormous harm to other animals, enormous harm to the environment, enormous harm to ourselves. And we eat food, in the United States, for example, and Canada is very similar. It's estimated that we could save 70% on healthcare costs, 70%, by shifting to a whole foods, plant-based diet. It's completely irrational to be eating food that makes us sick, but we do it. And why do we do it? Because we're creatures of habit. We do it, we learn what others around us do, we start developing habits, and then we just go along with it. And, it's been said that human beings are rational animals. I think it's a lot more accurate to say that human beings are rationalizing animals. And we especially rationalize if we don't feel very good about what we're doing. So when it comes to eating meat, oftentimes, when the issue of factory farming comes up or slaughter, people say, "Don't tell me, I don't want to know, it's too upsetting." But, I don't really think that's a great answer. I think it's better for us to actually pay attention and then act in a way that we can feel good about, that is aligned with our own values. So that's one of the main tenets that I talk about in my last book, Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, is living in alignment with our own values. Most people are humane. Most people don't like to see other animals suffer. They don't like to cause other animals to suffer. They don't like the idea of slaughter. Could you imagine what it would be like to work in a slaughterhouse, for example, where your job is cutting the throats of animals? That is not a job that most people want. And yet, most people, through our food choices, are supporting that industry and unwittingly requiring that these violent acts occur. So there's this disconnect between our compassion and our humanity and our actions, which are supporting such horrible things. So when we have this disconnect, we have to come up with good reasons why it's okay. And sometimes we tell ourselves that, well, we've always done this. But if we use that rationale, we would still be doing a lot of really bad things. But as humans, we are capable of evolving and of learning and of doing things better over time. And I think that's critically important. But to do that, we need to challenge assumptions, challenge the status quo, and ultimately pay attention to empirical reality and then make choices that are rational and make sense. So making choices that are aligned with our values means not supporting unnecessary harm. Another part of living the farm sanctuary life is to make choices and live in a way that is aligned with our interests, to eat food that doesn't make us sick. So, right now, many of us grow up being told that we need to eat meat for protein, right? This is one of these myths that enables this habit to continue. And it allows us not to really have to think about it. If I have to eat meat for protein, I don't really have a choice. Therefore, if I'm causing suffering, it's not my fault because I don't have a choice. I have to do it. But the fact is, we can live very well without eating meat or any other animal products. And, this is one of those myths that enables this ongoing habit to continue. And the industry is very happy to keep us believing this. But thankfully, there's more and more awareness, there's more athletes, there's folks like Robert Cheek here showing that you can become very fit and build muscle with plants. You have athletes like the only male weightlifter who qualified for the Olympics from the United States in Rio in 2016 was a vegan. You have people like Scott Jurek, who's an ultramarathoner, legendary in the ultramarathon world, won the Western States 100-mile race 7 times in a row. He's won a bunch of these high-profile endurance races, all as a vegan. So this idea that you need animal foods for protein or anything is ridiculous. Another of the myths that we grow up with and we're bombarded with the messaging around is that we need calcium so we don't get osteoporosis, right? Well, and so to get calcium, we're told you need to drink cow's milk. But, in North America, we drink a lot of cow's milk and we get a lot of osteoporosis. So there's, if we look at empirical reality, drinking cow's milk is not the solution to issues with osteoporosis or calcium deficiency. So it's really about stepping back, paying attention, then ultimately making choices that are aligned with our own values and our own interests. And I think if we position our messaging around that, it's pretty hard for people to argue against living in alignment with your values and your interests. It's also very rare for anybody to say they are for cruelty. They are for causing unnecessary suffering and violence to other animals. But what's crazy really is just how normalized the slaughter industry has become and how normalized drinking cow's milk has become. And it really speaks to our human capacity for rationalizing and doing things that don't make any sense. And if you look again at the course of human history, there have been times when human beings have participated in some really horrible things in large numbers, and it's been considered normal. You think of things like the institution of slavery. That was considered normal by many people. Think of the idea that, women couldn't vote. That was considered to be normal by many people. Think about the Holocaust, how horrible that was. And a lot of people participated in making that happen. So we have an enormous capacity for going along with and engaging in terrible behavior and then coming up with rationalizations for why it's okay. So the animal agriculture business is, I think, another example of an institution that results in enormous harm, enormous suffering for people and other animals, also enormous environmental destruction. The United Nations put out a report a couple of years ago called Livestock's Long Shadow, and in it they talked about how animal agriculture is one of the top contributors to the most significant environmental problems facing our planet, including the loss of biodiversity, including climate change. Animal agriculture contributes more to climate change than the entire transportation industry, according to the United Nations. So this is an industry that causes so much harm, and yet we are continuing to participate in it and be part of it and enable it by voting with our dollars and buying animal foods. So how does this happen? I think human beings, ultimately, we are social animals. We are influenced by those around us. And it is scary to be different. That's why, for me, when I grew up, I grew up eating meat like everybody around me. And I had little glimpses of this idea that eating animal foods was problematic. I remember one time in high school, I had come home from something, and my mother made a dinner, and it was a chicken. And I saw a dead chicken. I saw there's a body of this animal on his or her back on the plate with the legs and the wings, and I saw that was somebody. And I didn't eat chicken that night, and for much of high school, I didn't eat animal foods, or didn't eat meat. But as time went, as I went to college, I started again getting re-immersed in the normalcy of eating animal foods, and that image of that dead bird kind of faded away, and I re-adopted the habit of eating meat without really thinking about it. So we are social animals. We are very much influenced by our social environment. And if we are around people eating meat all the time, and we decide we're not going to do that, going out for a meal becomes somewhat stressful in many instances. It can become stressful for vegans and also stressful for non-vegans who now think, oh gosh, we got this vegan coming along, where are we going to go? Or when you're going to somebody's house for dinner. Now, I'm a fan of vegan integration. I think it's really good for vegans to circulate in the non-vegan world. But it is tough, even for non-vegans, knowing that a vegan is coming over for dinner becomes, in some cases, very stressful. What am I going to make? And so I think it's important for us to understand that for people, this can be scary because people want to prepare a meal that's going to be vegan, because sometimes people aren't sure what is vegan. Does this go in it? Does that go in it? So there really is just this lack of understanding of what it means. And for vegans, we have to be very patient and realize that sometimes people who really want to do good and make a nice vegan meal don't really know how to do it. Or people who are curious about being vegan might be interested in doing it, but they're not really sure how to. Or they're afraid they're not going to get protein. And for long-time vegans, we hear the question, well, where do you get your protein? Over and over again. And we might be tempted to just sort of roll our eyes and say, oh, it's easy. You can get it from tofu, you can get it from beans, you can get it from vegetables even. There's protein everywhere if you eat a balanced diet. But for people that have been bombarded with the industry's message that you need meat for protein, and because most people believe it and they sort of continuously restate that belief, a lot of people just don't know that they can get enough protein from plant food. So it's important for vegan advocates to be patient and to be understanding that non-vegans, in many cases, just don't know. And they're afraid of change. And it doesn't mean they're mean people or they want to cause unnecessary harm. It's just that there's habits people have. And change is very scary, especially if you're bombarded with messages that say eating meat is necessary for protein, or drinking cow's milk is necessary for calcium, or just the experience of going out to a meal and being vegan and knowing that you might cause things to be a little bit uncomfortable for others. So these are parts of the challenges of being vegan in a non-vegan world. And I've been saying the word vegan here a whole lot, obviously. And I identify as a vegan. I think it makes all the sense in the world to go vegan. But I also realize that the term vegan, for some people, can be a little bit off-putting. And it also is a label, which means that you're either in the vegan group or you're not in the vegan group. So in those ways, the term vegan can be a little bit problematic. And so when people ask me what it is to be vegan, I say that to me, it's an aspiration to live as kindly as possible. An aspiration to live as kindly as possible. It's not just an ingredient list. So, I don't eat meat or dairy or eggs. I stay away from animal products. I don't wear leather or anything like that. But I do buy organic produce. And organic produce, in many cases, is grown with slaughterhouse byproducts. Bone meal or blood meal or feather meal or fish meal. So technically speaking, if being vegan was an ingredient list, eating organic produce may not be vegan, right? So to me, it's an aspiration to live as kindly as possible, and then ultimately as well to create mutually beneficial relationships with other animals instead of exploitive, extractive relationships, which we currently have with farm animals. Now, bees are another, as a vegan activist, I don't generally talk a lot about bees and honey because it's one of those issues that's a little bit more muddy, but I'll bring it up here because this is, I think, a relatively vegan crowd. And just to look at things as they are in terms of mutually beneficial relationships. Bees are exploited not only for honey, but also for pollinating produce. There are billions, if not trillions, of bees that are brought to California to pollinate fruit and nut trees. So the point is that this is not a simple situation. It is a complex situation. And so making it one where it is an aspiration to live as kindly as possible, while recognizing that none of us is perfect. Not even the most vegan is perfect. We are all works in progress. We are trying to do better. And I think, in our vegan movement, it's also important to be humble and to be gentle and to be understanding of others who disagree with us. Within the vegan movement, there are also different perspectives. And you know what? I think that's actually healthy. Benjamin Franklin said, if everybody thinks the same way, nobody's thinking. So it's good for there to be different perspectives. But it's also important, I think, for these different perspectives to be communicated in a respectful way to others who may have also a different point of view. So there's, we're all individuals, but we all, I think, share the same desire to create a more compassionate world, a healthier world, a world where animal agriculture is not destroying the planet, not cutting down rainforests, not destroying natural ecosystems and wildlife habitat. All of us, I think, want pretty much the same thing. We want to live on a healthy place, right? Be with loved ones and not be harmed by others, and we don't really want to harm others. So that's really kind of the base of the whole concept of being kind. And when I talk about kindness as a vegan aspiration, that is kindness to other animals. It's also kindness to other people. It is kindness to the earth, and it's kindness to ourselves. Eating food that doesn't make us sick is being kind to ourselves. And as a longtime vegan activist, another way that I think it's important for us to be kind to ourselves is to recognize that, we've got a long way to go, and it's going to take a long time to get there, and we need to take care of ourselves, which means sometimes taking a break. Back when Farm Sanctuary started in 1986, part of the culture was, there's animals in battery cages, how can you take a day off? And that is true. There are still animals in battery cages. And how do we ultimately get them out of the battery cages? How do we ultimately change this world? And I think it's important for us to be healthy ourselves, to be healthy physically, to be healthy mentally and emotionally. And this work can be intensely draining and intensely difficult when we focus on the horrible things that we're up against. And back in the early days, I actually literally would go into these places finding living animals thrown in trash cans, or finding living animals thrown on piles of dead animals. Seeing animals in cages and crates, literally clanking against the bars in misery trying to get out. Being at these factory farms where the air is so thick, your eyes and your nose burn when you go into them. And the animals are in there their whole lives. And I would see this. I would also think about the people who work in these places. There's the animals that are there, and there's also the workers there. It's a violent, stressful, painful place for anybody to be. So rather than, I would go into these places, I would document conditions, and occasionally I would be able to rescue animals and bring them to the sanctuary and watch them heal. And as the animals healed, it sort of helped to heal me too, and help to heal others who are doing this sort of work. And I think about, the Serenity Prayer, right? To give me the strength to change the things I can, the serenity to accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So you do what you can, and you, for me anyway, dwell in the things you can do and take heart from the things you can do and be encouraged and inspired by the things you can do. And then recognize the things you can't do that are still problems and work on those, work on trying to address them and trying to stop them. And there are more tools today than there have ever been for our movement. We have amazing videos and documentaries now on Netflix, for example. There's What the Health. How many of you have seen What the Health? A lot of you have, and a lot of you haven't, but a lot of you probably don't have to if you're already aware of this stuff. There's Forks Over Knives, of course, which has made a big impact. There's Cowspiracy. There's Earthlings. How many folks have seen Earthlings? And that's a pretty tough film. And if it's too hard to watch that footage, by the way, you don't have to watch it. If you already understand this, you don't need to beat yourself up with those images. But I think the Earthlings is a very important film in that it sort of is a wake-up, and it kind of opens people's eyes to just how brutal human beings are to other animals. So there are these resources now that are widely available online. There's also, you go online, you can share videotapes and images of factory farming. Back when I used to do investigations in the 80s and 90s and up even into the early 2000s, but early on during our investigations, we would go on, videotape, we'd have to take the videotape and make copies of it, and then try to take it to a media outlet, and hopefully they would air it. Today, you have undercover footage that's online, and it can be shared with a click of a button. So that information is available. And social media is huge. I'm sure many people here have social media that they use to share information. I encourage you to do that and also share your experiences from this event here today, because again, we're social animals. We rub off on those around us. We learn from those around us. We learn from other people. But I would also suggest that we be somewhat discretionary in terms of how much factory farming cruelty footage we share. I think it's important for people to see that, but oftentimes if they keep getting bombarded with it, people are going to delete and maybe unfriend or just start ignoring, because as I was saying earlier, there's this dissonance between people's compassion and their behavior, and sometimes they just say, I don't want to know, don't tell me about it. And one of the reasons they say that, I think, is because they're afraid of change, and part of that fear has to do with a fear of failure, that they cannot change. So the other thing that we have now with social media is the ability to share solutions, to share great vegan recipes. So besides showing the problems with our current system, I think it's very, very important to show the solutions, to show people what they can do. Because, one of the worst feelings in the world, I think, is to believe you're acting in a cruel way that is not aligned with your humanity and your empathy, and to feel like you can't do something different. And I think a lot of people who are eating animal foods today are sort of in that predicament, where they're eating animal foods, they're bombarded with messages saying that they have to keep doing this, this is the normal way of things, and they're afraid that they don't know, they can't get the nutrition they need, or they won't like the food if they go vegan. So to the extent that we can show that vegan food is tasty, it's accessible, being vegan is not that hard, I think we will have a lot of success in creating positive change. And so when we are sharing information on Facebook, as a longtime vegan who's immersed in this world, it can be very maddening that we share information about cruelty and people don't respond and say, I agree, that's horrible, I don't want to be part of it, and change, right? I mean, that was our initial thinking at Farm Sanctuary. We thought we could show people the images, they would see it, they would say it's horrible, they wouldn't want to be part of it, and they'd go vegan. It's a little more complicated than that, So I think we need to realize that most people change slowly, that most people can be open to this if we approach it in the right way. And that means speaking to people where they are on their own journeys, and ultimately building bridges instead of walls. So with the issue of factory farming, just an example of how I've sort of evolved over the years. If somebody would say to me that they hate factory farming, they never buy factory